This is my video on why Tarkir Dragonstorm is the best set Magic has seen in a decade. For those who don't know, Magic's been having a bit of a hard time as of late. This is a Magic the Gathering Universes Beyond set that I have looked up, and it costs about $350 just to get one single Warhammer 40k commander deck. The release of Modern Horizons 3 basically reshaped the entire Modern format to be around one card, Ocelot Pride, being a 1/1 first striking lifelinker, which already power crept out the previous Modern Horizons set with a 1-drop that completely dominated that metagame. And they also recently announced that the Spider-Man Marvel set, which is going to be one of the main sets coming to Magic the Gathering, will not be able to come to Magic Online or Arena, divorcing the two formats for the rest of time. This basically leaves nobody happy. The Commander players are sad because they can't get access to their cards without paying an exuberant price. Modern players are mad because the Modern format has been basically deleted in lieu of other cards coming in from the Modern Horizon sets. And Standard and Limited players are mad because seeing the Spider-Man set coming out, you may really want to play with your Spider-Man cards, but you can't if you want to play anywhere but in paper, which is a massive problem because most people who play Magic the Gathering play it online and in paper both. All of these obvious monetary issues setting in have made it so that way even the regular sets that we are getting nowadays feel super half-baked. Sets like Outlaws of Thunder Junction, Murders at Carlisle Manor, Duskborn House of Horror, and Aether Drift have all felt like settings that really don't have any love or care put into the set. Kind of just a set to release to say, okay, we're still releasing Magic, now we have time to make more Universes Beyond stuff. But as of the release of Tarkir Dragonstorm, I have been given a lot more hope for the future of Magic the Gathering and that the game I love is still there. Tarkir Dragonstorm, when I went to play in paper, had a fully sold out pre-release, which is exactly what you want to see from a new set release. I remember at my LGS, I used to have fully sold out pre-releases for every single set, and now it is very hard to get a full house, but Tarkir Dragonstorm has managed that. But if you're just viewing from the outside, you might wonder why. Why is Tarkir Dragonstorm doing something better than something, say, like Aether Drift, a set that came out before it? I mean, obviously it's based on a previous Magic the Gathering set, but so is Aether Drift. So what is the difference between Tarkir and all of the previous sets this decade, which I have loved much less? If you ask me, there's two key words which make Tarkir Dragonstorm so beloved and so played amongst people, and it's the balance and the elegance of the set itself, which shows why releasing a good set is important and is meaningful to the player base as a whole. The initial challenge, if you were making a set based on a Tarkir block, which is one of the most beloved settings that Magic has ever seen, is to take the idea from Khans of Tarkir, which features all of the different clans, featuring these 3 different wedges of colors in Magic the Gathering, and pairing that with a setting from Dragons of Tarkir, the future version of the set, which features a lot of different dragons and more of the Megamorph mechanic, rather than the Morph mechanic, which was present in the original Khans of Tarkir block. The first most obvious thing that I would do if I was making a set with both the clans and the dragons in it on Tarkir would be to give each of the clans a different 3-color dragon. So here we have a legendary 3-color dragon for each of the different clans that you can play as a commander in a commander game, play in standard if you were building a standard deck, play in limited, wherever you need it. You can see that these cards are not only well costed, which means they can see play in limited and standard formats at lower power levels, as large flying dragons are oftentimes powerful there, but they all have abilities which scale with the game, meaning that in your commander games that go 20 plus turns, you will have an ability that comes down and can be recast over and over again, giving you a lot of value. Having all your spells have delve helps discount as you get more cards in your graveyard. Having your cards deal double damage when they enter improves every single haste creature that you draw for the rest of the entire game. Having extra lands lets Urne do extra damage to each of your opponent's creatures, and all of these cards really can show that the benefit for commander players can also be applied to limited and constructed formats as well. Because all of the legendary dragons are mythics, there is an uncommon cycle of 3-color dragons that is also present in the set to give players who may only play the limited format or may have access to less cards an idea of what the things that the dragons in each of the clans will end up doing. These cards are also made relatively powerful, so at lower power levels, you can still play with these cards and feel their impact, yet they do not dominate, meaning that they won't see play in constructed formats. However, where I think Dragonstorm Tarkir really shines is with the Omen mechanic present on many of the dragons in the set. These typically common or uncommon dragons that have the Omen mechanic allow you to do something for a cheaper cost than actually casting the dragon that oftentimes has impact on the game in the early game while still shoveling the dragon back into your deck. In this way, cards like this really fulfill the fantasy of a dragon in every single way any player could possibly want. They shuffle back into the deck, which means you don't feel bad about wasting your dragon, as you will simply draw them later to be recast, kind of eliminating that element of other types of split cards. Not to mention that dragons are by far the worst in the early game and the hardest to put into your decks because of their large cost, meaning that you can't really wait a long time for the dragon if you're just going to die before you get to turn 6 when you can actually cast them. These cards not only give you board impact in the early game, meaning that you will at least be able to do something to help stem the bleeding from your opponent to help you get to your large dragons, but they also frequently let you draw additional cards, meaning that you will have an easier time getting to the lands that you would need to cast the dragon in the first place. These cards are just immaculate design. So they nailed the dragons on Tarkir Dragonstorm. Obviously, that is the first thing you're supposed to do. But the second thing you need to do is make a good Magic set for all the different formats of people who play Magic. And that is something that Tarkir Dragonstorm also does in spades. I previously showed the 5 dragon lords that are present in each clan, which can all make for great commanders. However, there are also 5 regular legendary creatures which also feature the same design philosophy of being a great card to play in Commander. These cards are all costed very cheaply and also have reasonable stats and abilities for the size of their creatures, meaning that these cards are playable in constructed formats and also limited formats. However, all of them also have an ability that can be easily built around if made into your commander. Narset really rewards you for casting many spells in one turn, meaning that you can not only build around that in a commander deck, but you can also simply use it to draw a few extra cards per game in a limited game. The fact that each of these legendary creatures not only features enough design that you can build an entire commander deck around them being your commander, but also are powerful enough and interesting enough that they both see play in a regular format of constructed or limited, really goes to show that the design of Tarkir Dragonstorm is really focused on all of the formats and making sure that every single player can have a good time with the set. Whilst Commander is Magic the Gathering's most popular format, this definitely doesn't mean that Tarkir Dragonstorm is leaving other constructed players out of the picture. A card like Voice of Victory or Corey Steelcutter are both cards that I have seen play in Modern, are powerful cards with good abilities that also can see play in limited, constructed, or Commander decks. A card like Mystery Village, Songcrafter Mage, and Ugin Eye of the Storms, all of these cards I'm presenting here look to me like cards which would be really prominent in the modern format. Ugin is pretty obviously designed for a Tron deck. Songcrafter Mage reminds me a lot of Snapcaster Mage, a super powerful card in Modern. Mystery Village is just a great card for any counter war, even in a Legacy format. This card could see some sort of play. All of these cards, which are super powerful in older formats, are also balanced enough that in limited formats or in standard formats, they will still be good, but not overbearing. A testament to all of these cards being a way to make a card designed for every single format in the game. To really hammer home that there is no stone left unturned with Tarkir Dragonstorm, there is an entire cycle of super duper powerful spells for each of the different clans at a large mana cost. This is the exact kind of card that Commander players absolutely love to see and get to put into their decks. However, these are also cards which are just super sweet to play with in any way that you can. Because of their low cost and their relatively powerful effects for how much you end up actually paying for them, these cards can end up seeing play in a lot of different versions of Cube or a lot of different versions of standard decks or decks that would aim to cheat out the large spells at a lower cost. These kind of cards are super duper sweet and something that I think definitely belongs in every single set of Magic the Gathering. I've been gushing a lot about the constructed formats, and I will say that making cards that are good for constructed formats is super important to Magic. However, the limited design of this set is really where I think it sings the most, especially when compared to the previous Khans of Tarkir block. Each of the different clans in the original Khans of Tarkir had a mechanic behind it, which kind of gave you the identity of what the clan was doing in limited, and also gave you the idea for if you're building a deck around it, what your kind of thing is. So for Abzan, the main thing was the Outlast mechanic, which allowed you to pay some mana, tap your creature, and put a +1/+1 counter on it. Mardu was all about the raid mechanic, which only triggered when you attacked, which really made Mardu the focused and aggressive deck of the metagame. If you look at the Jeskai, their main mechanic was Prowess, a mechanic so good it became evergreen after it was added to the Jeskai, which simply asks you to cast non-creature spells to give your creatures a power bump, kind of balancing between the creature and non-creature elements of the Jeskai. If you look at the Teamer, they are all focused on the Ferocious mechanic, which is probably the least interesting of the mechanics in the original Khans block. It simply asks that you have a creature with a power 4 or greater, showing that Teamer cares about having big creatures, but not in a super interesting way. It only cares that you have a single creature with a large power on it. And infamously, the Sultai were the recipients of the Delve mechanic, a super duper powerful keyword which helps you discount your spells by exiling cards from your graveyard. Extremely powerful in decks that can fuel your graveyards very quickly. If you look at all these mechanics, a couple of them are really good. Prowess and Delve come to mind as super duper powerful and good mechanics to add to the game. However, things like Raid and Ferocious kind of leave a little bit more to be desired. But the main thing when I look at all these things is that they don't really synergize in any way. Having a Ferocious creature in your deck isn't really benefited by having a lot of Delve cards in your deck. Having Prowess doesn't really help you with Outlast in any way. These mechanics are all sort of separated, and that is something that Tarkir Dragonstorm has completely left behind. If you look at Endure, which is the new mechanic for the Abzan in Tarkir Dragonstorm, it allows you to either put a number of counters on your creature or create a token which is sized equal to the number of Endure you're doing. For Endure 1, you get a 1/1 counter and a 1/1 token. This 1/1 token, however, is also mirrored in the fact that the Marduk's mechanic is mobilize. Many of the creatures in the Marduk clan have the keyword mobilize, which says when they attack, they summon a 1/1 red attacking warrior token equal to the mobilize count. Both of these mechanics focus around tokens, which both help them play off each other in a certain way. Furthering this, connecting the Mardu and the Jeskai is the Flurry mechanic. The Flurry mechanic of the Jeskai says if you have cast a second spell during your turn, do a certain thing. In Wingblade Disciple example, it makes a 1/1 flying bird token. In this way, because Mardu is the most aggressive color and Jeskai the second most aggressive, these colors can both focus on Flurry being triggered multiple times per game in a very aggressive style, as more low-cost cards make it more likely for you to trigger Flurry multiple times. However, the other way to trigger Flurry would be to have a spell that gives you an extra card, being able to cast more spells per turn. This way, even if you have much more mana and much less cards in hand, you could still cast several spells per turn if you had a mechanic such as Harmonize from the Teamer. The Harmonize mechanic allows you to pay a certain amount of mana and cast a card from your graveyard. However, you can tap a large creature you control to reduce the cost of the spell by X, where X is that creature's power. In this way, the teamer not only focuses on their original idea of having large creatures to help discount their Harmonize spells by a lot, however, it also helps the Flurry mechanic because you can cast the spell with Harmonize multiple times in the same turn, triggering Flurry easily. But this is not the only way that Harmonize helps out, because Harmonize is cast in their graveyard. The Saltize mechanic is called Renew, which allows you to exile a card from your graveyard and usually give some sort of counter to a creature you control. Alchemist's Assistant, for example, allows you to pay 2 mana, exile it, and renew it, which allows you to put a lifelink counter on a creature you control by exiling the Alchemist's Assistant from your graveyard. In this way, the two grindiest colors of the Teamer and the Sultai, being focused on getting to the late game, both have mechanics which focus on your graveyard and getting to cast things multiple times, getting a lot of value out of the spells you cast over the course of the game. And looking at the connecting color pair to the Sultai, it's once again the Abzan. However, these things both focus on counters. Alchemist's Assistant and Foreskin Guard are both cards which give counters, which give an identity to the Abzan and the Sultai's connectedness. You can really see this shine with the number of multicolor 2-color cards that are present in this set. For example, in Black-White, it is all focused on the tokens between the Mardu and the Abzan. So we have a card like Hardened Tactician, which sacrifices any token to draw a card. Whether or not that's a mobilized card or a Endure card, you can get value out of Hardened Tactician. Red-White is probably the least focused of the 2-color pairs between the Jeskai and the Mardu. However, them both being the most aggressive colors means they can take the most advantage of a card like Frontline Rush. That is both very cheap to help you trigger Flurry, but also benefits from loss of creatures, being a good card for your mobilized cards to use. Between the Jeskai and the Teamer, we have Red-Blue, which is really focused on having a large amount of spells cast over the course of a game. This both helps the Flurry mechanic, being able to be triggered many times over the course of an entire game, but also helps with the Teamer's main mechanic of overwhelming your opponent with an extremely large amount of spells or creatures. In this way, the large creatures help you cast many spells, and the large spells allow you to develop many creatures, overwhelming your opponent with a sheer number of cards played. Between the Teamer and the Sultai, we have the green-blue, which is all focused on the graveyard. So all of the green-blue cards are focused on cards leaving your graveyard, either because you are casting them off Harmonize or exiling them off Renew. In this way, the green-blue, the most grindiest colors, get the absolute maximum amount of value over the course of the game with their two combined mechanics. And for green-black, which is between Sultai and Abzan, as I said earlier, it is all about the different counters, which means that you can put additional counters on your creatures and gain benefits from having lots of counters put on your creatures, either via the Renew mechanic or the Endure mechanic, allowing you to gain many different types of counters and different types of powers on all of your creatures. In this way, all of the 2-color pair cards can be picked and be put happily into either half of the clan, because they have mechanics that are beneficial for each of the other clans themselves. This synchronicity between all of the main mechanics of the set really showed that a lot of care went into the limited design of this format, and I hope that all the future sets also have this sort of feeling of synchronicity between all the cards. In this way, it makes it so that way new players can really not miss out because any card they put into their deck will feel good to play with as it works with every single archetype in the color trios. This is what makes Tarkir Dragonstorm, in my mind, feel like one of those older sets, and in my mind is the reason why it is having such success. It features the old design principles with cards that are powerful but interesting and cards that are maybe harder to work with, but puts in new design principles so that way almost every single card in the set feels like it has purpose and design and feels good to play with. In Khan's block, the original mana fixing was the Banner cycle, which was a cycle of 3 mana artifacts, which provided you an additional mana of each of the clan's colors and then could be sacrificed to draw a card if you had all 3 of the colors. Very clunky in the more aggressive style decks of Mardu or Jeskai, where you really wanted to have the mana fixing, but didn't really want to go through all the work of passing your turn 3 just playing a mana rock. On the other hand, we have Mardu Devotee from the new set, which is a 1-drop much more fitting of the Mardu clan, being an aggressive card you can play down in the early game, helping you scry so that way you can get to your more powerful threats, and also giving you that mana filtering, meaning that you don't gain additional mana. However, you can still put mana fixing into your Mardu deck without massively hamstringing yourself with a 3 mana artifact. The uncommon dragons of the previous sets were cards like Shieldhide Dragon, where they were a large dragon that you would feel pretty good to play. However, you were required to morph it a lot of the time with his Megamorph ability, as if you weren't able to get to turn 6 to play him down, the card would simply be sitting dead in your hand, not doing anything. This was a lot of the reason behind the morph mechanic. However, it made a lot of cards feel kind of the same, as you would simply just play down a 2/2 on turn 3 almost every game where you had a lot of morphs in your deck. Replacing these dragons with dragons that have the own mechanic on them makes them feel way better to play in the early game, as they give you a powerful effect in the early game to help you get to your late game dragons, but they also feel way better to play as a large late game dragon, which is the thing you really want to do with your dragon anyway. In this way, the own mechanic works way better than morph in terms of making your dragons playable. Previous magic rares would be like Dragon Whisperer, which was a mythic that could gain flying, gain power, and if you had Formidable, was able to summon 4/4 dragons. However, as a 2 mana 2/2 with no other keywords, the card would oftentimes come down and simply die without being able to do anything unless you were willing to wait till you had 8 mana and had a 8-power creature in play to trigger the Formidable keyword. In this way, these rares ended up feeling very powerful if they were simply not dealt with. However, when dealt with, the card felt basically nothing. If we look at a red rare from Tarkir Dragonstorm, we can really see the development of rares over time and why they feel so much better to play with nowadays. Tersa Lightshatter not only has an enter the battlefield ability, which lets you discard 2 cards and then draw 2 cards, meaning that you can gain a lot of value even if she dies immediately upon coming into play. She also has immediate impact, which is what a red deck almost always wants to do by being a hasty 3/3. Not only this, she also, like Dragon Whisperer, has a card ability that is very powerful in the late game, allowing you to cast cards at random from your graveyard once you have 7 or more cards in there. In this way, this card both works in the early game and late game, whereas a lot of bombs from the previous sets would only work when you get to that super duper late game and can finally start activating their abilities for super powerful effects. In this way, this feels like a very more modern design principle where the card has a lot more space to play in the early and late game. Finally, here we have Ghostflyer Blade, which gives an equipped creature +2/+2, equips for 3, however it costs 2 less if it targets a colorless creature. Obviously meant to work with the morphs and megamorph mechanic, being able to power up your morph from a 2/2 into a 4/4, a very powerful card back in the day. However, in the modern time, we have replaced this with Dragonfire Blade, which gives +2/+2 hexproof from monocolored, meaning the card gains a little bit of protection, doesn't totally blow you out for putting all of your mana into a guy just for it to die to a kill spell. However, its equip cost is 4 and 1 less for each color of the creature it targets. Not only does this help benefit the clans, if you have a 3-color card, the card costs only 1 to equip, just like Ghostfire Blade. However, this card also synergizes with many other types of cards. If you have a 4-color creature, for example, you can equip Dragonfire Blade for free, giving the card a lot more flexibility than only equipping to colorless creatures, of which there are not that many in Magic that you actually want to play in your decks. In this way, it makes it feel that almost every single card in Tarkir Dragonstorm serves a much more functional purpose when compared to previous and older Magic sets, where a lot of cards like Killshot, for example, being a powerful weight removal spell, however, really couldn't see a ton of play in Mardu decks because you didn't want to be the one who was getting attacked. You wanted to be the one who was doing all the attacking, massively hamstringing your ability to play this card in aggressive style strategies. A card like Monastery Flock has 0/5 Defender for 3 mana and even is a card that was featured for the Jeskai. However, when you look at this card, what does this card really do for the Jeskai archetype? It doesn't help you with prowess. It doesn't give you any keywords or anything that are useful. Defender is actively detrimental to your plan of attacking your opponent with some sort of tempo. So this kind of card doesn't really seem like it would fit in a modern metagame. However, even looking at some of the worst cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm, like Seize the Opportunity or Cortic Nesgard, you can see that these cards clearly have intention behind them and are wanting you to play them, even if they aren't the strongest cards in the game. Seize the Opportunity helps you cast multiple spells in the same turn to help with the flurry mechanic, pumps up multiple creatures, so that way it's good in Mardu decks that want to have lots of creatures in play. It gives you additional value to help with your Harmonized cards, allowing you to play cards multiple times if you exile them with the first ability. Cortic Nesgard is in green, which is the most defensive of all the colors in the set, which is why it has Defender. It has a larger body for the cost, which means that you can play it down early, use it a bit for defending, and then later on in the game you can activate its ability so that you can attack more times as though it didn't have Defender. Even the worst cards in this set really ring out to me as cards that are meaningful and need to be in the set to help it function at its fullest extent. And finally, this really feels like a Magic set. This is the more watery of all of my elements. However, I feel like it's the most true about this set than it has been for almost any set released in the past couple years. It has a different yet high fantasy feel that still rings true as Magic the Gathering. A card like Stormscale Scion is not only a 6 mana red dragon calling back to the original Shivan dragon, it has the storm mechanic calling back to storm and really evokes a Magic the Gathering feel as a large dragon, which we can't really see in a lot of other sets that come out. Reigning Victor really exemplifies the Mardu's battle glory and the fact that if you are playing a setting with Magic the Gathering, you want to feel like the cards kind of are cohesively coming together in a whole. Even though this is an Orc Warrior, he still screams that he is from the Mardu, and you don't really have to see any of the card text to kind of understand that this is a Mardu card. Another thing that feels really magic are the sagas that were a huge hit when they originally came out in the Dominaria block. These cards are super duper telling as they tell a story for each of the different clans. There's one for each one of them, and they each have abilities that line up with what the clan wants to do, really giving you a feeling for not only the clan, but the artwork and the design of the card really shows what the clan is all about and what their stories are telling. The card that felt the most out of place to me in the set is Knockout Maneuver, which is a card that features a couple teamer guys fighting. This card isn't super duper out of place. It feels a little bit weird to watch some teamer guys wrestling, but this still feels in the lines of what the teamer does as a clan and also doesn't feel that weird as a card to have in the game. Compare this to Aether Daring Mechanic, a random common from that set, which is basically a guy with a wrench on a speeding car. If you took away the magic part of this card, say you took away the 3 mana 3/3 and you took away the creature type line and then you took away the text box on it and the mana cost, if I just showed you Daring Mechanic and this guy, you wouldn't think it's from Magic the Gathering. It kind of feels like it could be from any generic card game out there because it doesn't really have any identity that is associated with Magic. The same true with Outlaws of Thunder Dungeon and Shackleslinger here. This just feels like a pretty generic cowboy using some sort of blue magic to throw some cuffs at a guy. If you remove the blue magic, this guy is literally just a cowboy and he could just be holding the pair of cuffs. This card really doesn't feel very magic-y to me. It really doesn't exemplify anything besides the fact that he's from Magic and is using a magic spell. So if you remove a lot of the elements of this card, this would also not feel like a magic card. A card like Reluctant Role Model, if you just took this artwork and the words Reluctant Role Model and that was all you saw, you wouldn't immediately guess that this is a Magic card. You could guess that this is from some sort of horror game or Clue game that had come out in the previous years. In this way, these cards don't feel like Magic cards in the sense that if you were stripped away the magic part of the card, there's nothing really left that let you show as a Magic card, like with some cards that you were seeing in the previous slides. Looking at Sharp-Eyed Rookie here, another card from the previous sets. It's just a guy with a magnifying glass looking down at the ground at some sort of thingamabob or doodad. There's some magical elements going on with her hand and her leg here, but if you look at all of these cards from the previous sets, do any of these cards ring out that they are from Magic the Gathering intrinsically? In my mind, they don't, and that is why these sets haven't had this mass appeal that I feel that the set like Tarkir Dragonstorm should. And whilst I think having cards like this in your set would be okay if they were the exception rather than the rule, like Knockout Maneuver is in Tarkir Dragonstorm, having cards like this that are the main feature of your set and the thing that everyone's going to look at definitely makes people feel a lot less like Magic cares about their world building, about their lore, and about having the set feel like it's a Magic the Gathering set. And that's why I hope that we can end up getting a lot more sets like Tarkir Dragonstorm. Sets with iconic characters coming back from the past, large Magic 30-year history with interesting mechanics on them to help keep them relevant in the modern day. Iconic callbacks to powerful spells from years past that help remind you of what made you fall in love with this game in the first place and also give you some dopamine in the meantime when you're playing with the new cards of today. Interesting mechanics would help bring cards which players love to play into the game in powerful and interesting ways. Having the Omen mechanic to help you play with the dragons that you always wanted to play with as a youth that you never got the chance to because you died too early. Now you can. That is what Magic should really be doing in my mind. Having calls back to Magic's earliest days is something that Magic should never shy away from, in my mind. Having new Moxes, having new Lotuses, having new characters coming in is great to help keep players who are really invested in the game coming back over and over again, year over year, to keep playing the game that they fell in love with all those decades ago. Whilst I definitely feel despair looking at the timeline of Universes Beyond and the Magic the Gathering space set coming out that doesn't really inspire confidence for me, I do see that there is still love at Wizards and there are still designers who are focused on making the best formats they can and making the best feeling sets that really feel like they come from Magic the Gathering's heart. And that is what I am really hoping for, more things like Dragonstorm Tarkir and more sets that I will be able to give my money to and feel good that I am helping Magic provide more for itself in the future. And that's the video. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. This isn't exactly my multi-card game thing, but I've been playing so much Tarkir Dragonstorm, I just felt like I had to talk about it, which is why I haven't been releasing videos lately, because I've just been simply playing so much Tarkir Dragonstorm. This set is such a blast. I would challenge you in the comments to try to find any card in the set that doesn't fit or belong in some sort of way. If you can, let me know down below, and I'll try to reply to any comment that I can about that topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.